So just kicking off, so my promise to you today is we're going to talk about Agile. I'm not going to make any assumptions that everybody is on the same page when we talk about big A Agile and small A Agile. So it'll be really good. And I've got some of others in our team that are on the call as well that I'm sure are going to jump in and help as well to bring more insights and learnings for you guys as much as possible and answer any questions that you have. Also talk about what's happening today. So we're going to share some insights around what actually is happening today in a number of different organizations across industries. Obviously, we'll be conscious of not mentioning their names, but we can tell you what's actually going on practically from our experience in the last 5 years. And then also, what are the challenges? So when you registered, I asked you all to explain what was the challenge that you were facing. So we've taken that information and we have categorized them into some themes. So we thought we could deep dive into some of those and perhaps look at how you can tackle them. And then we're also going to talk about some opportunities as well. That's from my side. From your side, I am hoping that you are comfortable to participate as much or as little as you would like. You're welcome to call out questions throughout, put them in the chat if you'd prefer to do so that way, really more of a discussion as opposed to a presentation of any sort. Tag us in your best takeaway from today. If there's anything you learned, something you think would be valuable for anyone else, please do so on LinkedIn. And then there'll be a 1-minute survey with 3 questions at the end. So how does that sound for everyone? All good?
Yep.
Perfect. So how many people actually know the difference between big A Agile and small A Agile? Not many. Okay, perfect. Well, I'm gonna suggest. Oh, sorry, that just expanded the screen a bit. I'm going to suggest it might be worthwhile just kind of discussing both of these, and I might tap into Kathy, who is an expert in all things Agile as well, who can definitely help share some of her valuable insights. But often people, when they think about Agile and PMO, there's an assumption always that we're talking about big A Agile, which is what you see on the left-hand side. As you can see from the image on the left-hand side, when we're talking about big A Agile, it relates to different techniques, different tools that people are using, it's different processes, different things that relate to it. I'm not going to say methodology because Agile is not a methodology, but people use it in that sense. So for example, there's been a number of different organizations out there that have created a methodology that leverages the principles and behaviors and beliefs of Agile. But ultimately, these are just some of those examples that when we talk about big A Agile, where a lot of companies at the moment are moving towards, and you might hear the term Agile ways of working or new ways of working, this is really what they're referring to. This is where they generally start making their transformation. And you'll find that many organizations will pick a particular type of approach and then go with it. Most popular at the moment would be SAFe, which is the Scaled Agile Framework for Enterprise. That's what I've seen the most of in the last 5 or 6 years. But I'd be interested to know, has anyone else seen a particular type of framework or method used in the business that they're working in today? Does anyone want to share one that maybe they've heard, or have you heard of SAFe in your organization?
Not within my organization, but it's something that I mean, I've just attended a class a couple of months ago about SAFe, but not within my organization. Sorry, I interrupted somebody.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I can see Scrum in there, and of course Lean, which is probably pretty popular, but I haven't heard of SAFe, to be honest.
Okay. Anyone else? Feel free to shout out because I can't see you. So if you want to just call out, feel free to. Does anyone else is anything else on here completely familiar, or the opposite end, not familiar at all? Kathy, did you want to share your thoughts on what do you think is the most common from your experience? You do a lot of training. What do you train the most in?
Scrum and Scrum and Scrum and Scrum. I see Scrum being a lot of people coming to Scrum training and then failing to be able to implement it because they have trouble scaling it. So then I see a lot of movement saying, well, Scrum doesn't work, so I need SAFe because SAFe is scaled. And then it's very, it's a major transformation type of framework. So then they fail at that. And then there's some sort of in between. I see Scrum ban. So I see a lot of Kanban as well. But I see most sensible organisations, and I say that tongue in cheek, don't implement one of these frameworks lock, stock and barrel. They tend to blend. So I am seeing a lot of hybrid models, a lot of, dare I say it, water Scrum fall, but definitely SAFe is people who are scaling. They're the most popular. Scrum for many team-oriented things. And I see a lot of Kanban, they're the three that I see the most. Most of them will implement some sort of idea of backlogs or stories or epics or increments and sprints. I see those practices, which are not specific to one only framework, I see them being used a lot, but they're not being used as effectively as they should be because they're missing the richness of a complete framework and, dare I say it, a transformation at scale, which is sometimes missing. So but I do see a lot of hybrid. That's probably what I'm seeing the most of.
Or the term that comes to mind, Wagile. Wagile is something that you guys might have heard of. Waterfall Agile, they call it Wagile. But I would agree the hybrid side of things is typically what the larger organizations do. So to give you a really specific example, a number of the big 4 banks that we have here in Australia, for those that aren't familiar, that have introduced Agile and Agile new ways of working, they themselves have introduced a hybrid approach to Agile, but several of them are actually leveraging the SAFe model. SAFe is the one that probably, I kind of see it's probably the one that's been most commercialized. Like it's in the last, I'd say 5 or 6 years it's really exploded? Yeah, it's about 5 or 6 years it's mostly exploded. So when you see a large organization as big as the banks, as an example, they typically go with SAFe because it is scalable. I mean, there's scalability in all of these. It's not that it's not, but it just seems to be the most popular with the executives and they seem to love it. And so they bring big consultancies in and they will do a hybrid version of SAFe. So that's typically what's happening in the Agile space. But one thing I just want to call out that I think will be really relevant. So one of the things that, you know, becomes a big of a challenge for PMOs is the fact that whenever delivery teams, and typically it's the delivery teams that are leveraging these, they themselves, the PMOs themselves, are put into a position where they either need to adopt and adjust and apply these themselves. And often you're not given any training, any insights or any even support to do so, but then you're expected to change the way that you're working to align to delivery as opposed to being part of that journey. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well today. Okay, unless there's any questions, let's go to Small Agile. So Small Agile. Sorry,
no question, but sorry, no question, but you bang on because that happened exactly to me.
And from the challenges some of you raised in your response when you were registered, I've got a feeling that you're not the only one, and it is very common, which is another reason why we wanted to kind of start this conversation and continue to have it. So on the Small Agile, how many of you are familiar with Small Agile? Have you heard that term before?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So hard not seeing you guys. I don't like this, but anyways, so just yell out. So Small Agile is all about the values, the beliefs, the things that drive obviously the step change that's needed to be more agile. We in Agile Management Office, the company that I work for, refer to Agile in our name as Agile in terms of agility, even though it's a capital, but agility. So for us, Small Agile for me is all about that agility and some of these other characteristics. It's the principles and the behaviors and the values and the beliefs that drive the mindset to actually adopt and apply in your organization to change the way that we work. Now, unfortunately, many organizations focus so much time and attention on Big A Agile and the practices and frameworks, and they actually either don't pay as much attention or kind of ignore the small A agile stuff. And I'll give you a really specific example. One organization recently that we've sort of done some work with, they went in and introduced a type of practice called a stream model within the business. And that leverages some of the principles of Agile and some of the learnings, but only the bits and pieces that they felt was relevant. They actually didn't take into account all of the small Agile things in their transformation towards working in streams. They picked and choose what suited them based on the culture within their organization. And I think they probably included some things and others they left off, which they probably would have been better off including. But the problem with Agile, I think the biggest problem is that with organizations, depending on how it's been brought in, whether it's top down from an executive deciding or from the bottom up, and we'll look at that in a second, often there's a lot of assumptions being made and we're not taking the time to talk to our customers and our stakeholders and to the executives and to the delivery teams. Like, we need to understand, get everyone on the same page, regardless of which part of Agile that you're bringing into the organization, to make sure that you make that step change or it won't stick. So it's really important. And one of the biggest things that we like to emphasize on is teaching the small A Agile techniques and helping to instill that mindset. Does anyone have any other things they want to add or raise about big A and small A Agile? Any thoughts or experiences?
Thought I'd just share one little example. As a coach, I've coached quite a lot of organisations, big and small, and some of the big end of town and the big telcos and banks. And I see a lot of people saying that they're agile because they're using Jira or sticky notes or things on walls or they're sprinting. So I see a lot of them saying we're agile because we're doing the techniques, we're doing the practices. But then when you ask them about what happens if something changes, or what happens if the customer gives you this feedback? Oh, well, no, that has to go through, no. And you just think, okay, so you're agile in name only. And we call that called ANO, agile in name only. There is way too much agile in name only because they're doing what they think is the big A stuff that looks good on paper, but they haven't got the mindset, they haven't got that attitude, and they fail to really reap the rewards because it's half-baked and compromised at every turn because the mindset is not quite there. Just thought I'd share that. And I see it time and time again. I've got to say, it's not uncommon, and it's unfortunately way too common.
It's a really good point. I sent a post on LinkedIn yesterday just talking about people using Agile as a way of getting around actually doing any work, because as you can see from this image, it's really complicated. I mean, if you think about waterfall project management, waterfall is not a methodology, but it's just the way that people describe it, right? It's very simple and everybody kind of just generally follows it and gets it. But when you look at this, it can be quite overwhelming. And for PMOs, you often don't even know what type of Agile the organization's instilling, because as you said, Kathy, you often will see, you'll walk around your office and you'll start seeing, I mean, how many people have seen the big Kanban walls or Kanban walls with all of the sticker notes and all the icons and emojis? I mean, that's fun, but it has to make sense. It has to be understood. It has to be useful. It has to basically, it has to be integrated. Everybody has to be on the same page or it becomes useless. So there's a lot of abandoned walls around offices everywhere because people get excited in creating it, but then ultimately they don't actually do anything more with it. So let's get into a bit more detail on that. As I said, feel free to shout out if you've got any questions, because I can't see you.
Yeah, I mean, I would be interested to at least to know more about some of the hybrids, because I've been discussing even within my own company or classes that I attend. Everybody's going to hybrid, and I don't know whether is that supposed to work or not. But definitely, what I experienced with speaking with some friends and colleagues is a lot of companies are going into Agile because they think that's the trendy thing to do, but they don't really understand the whole concept of it and how is it supposed to be implemented throughout the company. They just think that as long as my delivery team is doing it, that's it. We're doing Agile already. So hopefully we'll get to learn more during this hour.
that they're really good points, and I'm happy to give you a couple of I'll give a couple of specific responses to that I think would be the right time for now. So I think the thing is that a lot of organizations, and I can say this because I've seen it firsthand in at least half a dozen organizations in the last 12 months. The reason why I believe, and others like experienced people like Kathy and anyone else on the call that might have a different perspective are welcome to share their view. But I genuinely have seen people going to Agile or Agile ways of working or NWOW or whatever they want to call it for one reason and one reason only. And that specifically is because they are looking to reduce costs. So they believe that we will reduce costs as a result of moving to an Agile model, and an Agile model relates to a matrix organization, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, some people will go, oh, no, that's not true. And they'll tell you it's not because of that. But every organization that I've personally been working with, I've seen there's a big component of it that is to reduce costs. Now, I will say it's not just about reducing people. It is actually about increasing efficiency. And if you increase efficiency, you then reduce costs naturally. And then we all have more time in our hand, in our day. So that's one big reason. But just on the hybrid point, and I think it's a really good question, Sebastian, that you raised, because hybrid can be for some people, and it definitely was for me when I first got my head around Agile many years ago. But hybrid is just basically saying we're going to pick and choose bits and pieces from different frameworks and practices and methods, and we're going to make up our own. That's all it is. So it's in line with that. There is components of that, especially at the starting of your life cycle, where organizations don't want to relinquish control around how the financial and investment management activity happens. So they stick with the waterfall approach to that, a very sequential and rigid finance approval process. Then when it gets into the build and test stage, where delivery teams are coding and building and testing feedback with stakeholders and things like that, then they go, just do that in Agile. So it's kind of just bringing those bits together, but it's very personalized to however the organization wants to do it. I will go to Jagan, who's raised his hand for questions or comments.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, hi, Fatima. So one of the things I've been experiencing recently is organizations I've seen, they go flat out into Agile. That is completely like I would personally prefer, like say, for example, if you're taking a program or a project, why there is no evaluation whether this project would be fitting into an Agile or a Waterfall or that analysis never goes. It's just either flat out, entire organization changes to Agile, irrespective of whether it fits. Even in infrastructure project, yes, I do working, but then you tend to abandon the plans, you tend to abandon the end goals, the roadmap, and you start doing in a very Agile method, which I feel there is visibility beyond 3 or 4 sprints at the max. If you look at SAFe, it will be just a quarterly PI or something. So that's where I have been struggling. And in my practical experience, I have never let go the high-level roadmap, which is waterfallish. And I might be a culprit, but then still that has worked, but allowing the teams within to use the Agile, which is purely Agile. And struggle between the reporting of velocity versus standard reporting in a waterfall method, how you use the MSP and then do the percentages, and then based on your professional judgment, you say that the milestone is in risk, or based on the percentages purely, how much percentage the work is completed on the W. So there a conflict comes between how the PMO has to report, if it is Agile way, where the delivery team reports in a clear velocity or in a Jira dashboards.
So this is a really good point. So as I've sort of just summarized kind of a little bit of what you've just shared. So the challenge is that you're getting into solution mode for how do I change the way that I'm reporting so I can report statistics like velocity and burn rate and all of those other things that are things that typically are metrics and measures that are being used by delivery teams. So obviously the PMO is in this instance looking to actually create information that then they can provide as part of executive reporting or steering committees or whatever it might be. But I think we need to go back a step. So what we need to think about is understanding exactly what is it that we need to change in the way that we do things in the PMO, and working with our delivery teams. What are the inputs and the outputs that we actually need to change and that we need to focus on in order to be able to align with delivery, rather than trying to fit in a piece of a puzzle that doesn't fit. Because if we spend time, and I've seen this firsthand, where we spend time basically trying to create reports or processes following through delivery, but without actually co-creating or consulting with them, you will actually spend more time, because they'll change something. I've seen organizations use a PPM tool, portfolio management tool, and then after all the effort the PMO spent in getting everything up to speed and training people and all of that, they then stopped using that and created everything in Confluence. And then they started getting their head around Confluence, and then they started introducing additional tools. So we kind of got to take a step back. And what I recommend for PMOs is you agree an approach, whether that's using a Kanban approach, if you want to use Agile techniques, but create an approach that you can work with delivery to determine what you actually are going to do and what you need to do and why. Because a lot of the time, we actually spend too much time doing things only to have them not be used by the relevant people. So let's get into some specific challenges, because I think it'll be really worthwhile to dive into that and keep talking about this. So I just wanted to quickly show you guys what Agile is not. I'd be interested to see if there's anything here that surprises anyone, but it is something that we have to say, because often people make a lot of assumptions, and these are some of the assumptions that were discussed in one of our team workshops recently, where, as Kathy pointed out, sprints and Kanban doesn't mean you're Agile. The idea of Agile not being a methodology, and then other questions being raised around, can I use Agile in this industry or in that industry? It's industry agnostic. It's about what practices that you can bring in depending on what result that you're trying to achieve. But this is sort of some of the key things that Agile is not. Did anyone have any questions on any of these? Okay, cool. So I'm just going to quickly take you, before we get into some of the challenges, is the Agile, what Agile is and what Agile is not. So when we think about traditional, and traditional in the sense is very hierarchical, also referred to as a bureaucratic team, versus a more agile team, which is more of a matrix style organization. So when you think about the hierarchical organization, it's often very top down. There's individual responsibilities. It's quite clear what those are because it's a hierarchy that you're following. Many large organizations, and a lot of organizations that are also sort of been around for 50, 100 years, like some of the banks, and even in government, they're very much hierarchical. So then they try to bring in Agile, which is all about matrix teams, and they struggle because in Agile, you have cross-functional teams that are quite autonomous. You can't have autonomous teams and then overload them with rigid governance. And this is why I always stress that we need to learn how to put the Agile into governance and not the governance into Agile. So I just thought I would share this, because often what you'll find is an organization typically doesn't change their entire hierarchy and turn it into a matrix team. They just don't do that. I've not seen that. I don't know if anyone else has, but what they might do is create sort of smaller Agile teams. For example, IT departments, many of them that I've seen in the recent years are changing the way that they work, becoming less hierarchical and actually turning into more of a matrix team within the organization. But I just wanted to see if does this resonate with anyone? Is this something new? Is there any questions on this, or is there anything anyone wanted to add?
I just want to say, I think this is great. You made a really good point about, the traditional and the way organizations change. Like I'm working in a pretty large organization, and I don't think some of the leaders communicate how it's changing well enough for, I guess, everyone to understand. So yeah, appreciate this. This slide here. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Trung, for that feedback. The way I kind of describe it is, if you think of a traditional manager, so think of the people that you just described, they're kind of like them in trying to get their head around an agile organization is kind of like someone visiting a foreign country, where for the first time when you go to this foreign country, you're actually having to think about what are the practices and the cultural elements that I need to address and make sure I apply so that I'm not offending anyone and that I'm working within the cultures and bounds of that country. So traditional managers in an agile sort of organization, they're so far removed from the detail that they often don't really kind of get it. And so they are the ones that need probably the most time spent, but because they've got the least time, they tend to really slip behind. And I actually believe, and I always talk about the triangle that connects strategy, delivery, and operations. I see the PMO as the enabler between those three. And there's a lot of different things we could get into, but we'll probably spend most of the rest of the time on that, but that I talk about a lot and that I share and will continue to do so. But it's about bridging the gap between the three. And I think the PMO is the ultimate enabler to bring the strategic vision of the executives to delivery and bring the two together. So yeah, I think it's definitely one we can keep talking about. So I want to take you to what's actually happening with Agile and PMOs today. So I want to give you a few examples, and then I'd love to discuss and get a feel from you guys as to what you're seeing or maybe what you're not seeing in your organization. If you think about sort of the ePMO level, at the moment with some of the organizations that I've kind of been seeing and the companies we've been working with, from an ePMO perspective, one of the examples that I can tell you is they've, in a medium-sized organization, for example, the ePMO is actually taken the bull by the horns, so to speak, and is actually spending and investing their time in bringing in all things agile and ways of working to the wider organization. So they themselves have been part of creating a hybrid methodology. And it's okay, I will say, that if you are in an organization that has a waterfall methodology and you have a full pure agile and then you've got a hybrid, that's okay. Whatever works for the size of your organization, different pros and cons for that. But in this ePMO, as an example, what is actually happening is the ePMO is becoming the custodian of the tools that enable more effective agile working, like Jira and Confluence. They're actually also responsible for introducing and bringing together the right training needed to bring about the change, not only from big A Agile, but small A Agile. Another example is the ePMOs are taking all of their processes and procedures and actually leaning them down. So rather than being responsible for governing and checkpointing across 15 gates, for example, or across a project delivery lifecycle, they're actually making sort of maybe 2 or 3 major points within a project lifecycle and then enabling the teams to govern within those phases within their team. And obviously there's some assurance activity that they're doing as well, so that they are not completely forgetting that, we still need to be compliant depending on our industry, etc. When I think of a sort of more divisional PMO level in a larger organization, an example that comes to mind is that in the UK government, there is a government department, so within IT, and what they've done is the PMO has gone from 100% traditional, I'm talking about processes that they've been using for 20 years, and they've actually taken that and now they've jumped on and they've actually implemented SAFe. They've jumped on the bandwagon and they're championing the whole of the agile transformation. And over the last 12 to 18 months, what they've gotten to is they are the people leading it within the whole organization. They've now become the champions for it. And they've actually built a center of excellence, which is all about agile ways of working. So that's an example of a divisional team that now is getting recognition from other departments within their organization. And then just another kind of quick example, when I think about more of at a department level, or even when there's been people that are big agile enthusiasts that are trying to introduce things, you might see some people with a Kanban wall on their desk, or other things that they do. Maybe they do their work in sprints. So there's a few people that are sort of in a smaller team that are doing that. And what they're doing is they've actually now completely reduced governance, which maybe they've gone to too much of an extreme, but time will tell. And they've actually made their governance focus all around the financials. So financial metrics, financial reporting, etc. And what they've done is all of the other layers of governance they had on delivery, they've left that with the delivery leads and the scrum masters to manage. So they're kind of going, we're only focusing on one component and the rest of it you're going to basically be managing in your team. So there's a few different things that are happening, and they're just a few examples. I'd love to go around and see if anybody else wanted to share an example either within their existing organization or another organization they've worked. No one is seeing anything at the moment within their organization? Or perhaps maybe this is part of the reason why today is to help sort of drive where you move forward. Is there anything else we've seen? Maybe any particular examples that have come to mind that maybe you've heard on, even if you've seen it online, perhaps?
Hi there, it's Kathy again. I thought I'd just quickly share an example of one of my clients that I worked with for a couple of years, a government department. And they found, again, the PMO was exactly the enabler that you've referred to. They were the ones that had the vision, helped support an agile way of thinking and working throughout the organisation. And they were there to coordinate cycling up teams, first of all, setting up pilot projects. So they didn't just say, everybody go agile. They had a couple of learning experiments. And they supported them by saying, well, because you're learning and this is a very discretionary, not important kind of project, we can cut our teeth on it, get those learnings. And they were very, dare I say, agile about how they were learning about how it might work best for that organisation. And then they became the champions to figure out the right training, the right projects. And not just that, something that was also said earlier, one thing they implemented and they recognised early on is that they couldn't say every project is agile. There was a pre-project assessment to determine, is this project suitable for agile and which kind of agile and which ones weren't. So they became the champions, and it was interesting over the 2 years that I was coaching and consulting with that particular organisation that the first year focused primarily on the IT guys, because everybody thinks of agile IT, right? And they found that there was some success and a lot of great projects and some good results came from just the agile implementation in IT teams. The second year of consulting and coaching was coaching the rest of the organisation of how they can leverage those kinds of practices within other departments and work better to support the full value. So working with procurement, working with marketing, working with finance. So I have seen it done well, and the PMO was that enabler that you've talked to, and it was wonderful that they recognised that they were the conduit. And I think that that's an important thing that we need to stress, that there needs to be that champion, that buy-in, and I think the PMO is the right place of the organisation to align and bring together these parts. So I thought I'd just quickly share that.
It's awesome. Thank you, Kathy. I think it's really good to see the fact that it's spread outside. There's often the trialing of PMO, trialing Agile can happen at individual level, and then it scales because people talk and they get feedback and then they want to. So some organizations will do it as a guinea pig, sort of, let's just try it over here and, you know, we'll isolate ourselves from everybody and then we'll actually scale up. And I think that's a really good a good example. One other one that I think I wanted to share that I think would be relevant for everybody on today is one of the things that I think is really important, and maybe I didn't mention it earlier, is if an organization is moving to an agile way of working and they are going to choose some of those big A agile practices, it's really important to get clarity on what of those practices you're going to apply. Because if we go into an organization and let's just say, you know, Mary's team does Scrum and then another team gets certified in DSDM training and then another team's doing, it's going to be so difficult for you guys as PMO to even keep up. Like the whole point of using a particular framework and then making it hybrid to suit your organization, but start with a framework that you all agree on. And I know that unless you're in an enterprise level or a divisional level, you might not have the authority to drive that but you might be able to influence it and giving some pros and cons as to why we recommend doing this or that. Ultimately, from a PMO perspective, you can start by identifying a problem that you see, whatever the problem you're hearing or seeing is. The methodology is a great one. Which methodology do we bring in, do we use? Maybe it's creating a questionnaire that basically helps you determine as a project delivery person which methodology I'm going to choose and why. And so things like that, it's behaviors you can start doing that bring about a solution to a problem, and then the feedback you'll get through that is going to help you in taking your PMO to the next level. Cool. Any other questions on this from anyone before we move on to some challenges? Awesome. Okay. So I asked you to let me know what were some of the challenges that you had coming into registering for today. Now, we have obviously more challenges raised and less people on the call. That's normal. But what I wanted to do is I've taken sort of your challenges and I've actually categorized them into themes. So from everything that you guys have said, and your comment should be on here, so hopefully it is. I've sort of broken it up into themes, and I thought we could discuss some of those. So at the moment, obviously, we've got all the behavioral people side of it. That is absolutely related 100% to everything to do with mindset. And so this is going to be a really important one, because the behavior and the resistance can be addressed and solved for with some of those small A agile principles, techniques, etc. We need to help people get on that journey. If you think about it, for however many years, people are so used to traditional waterfall, whatever you want to call it, project management. And how long did it take to get your head around that? I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. And then now we've got organizations that are trying to go to agile ways of working in 12 months. It's just not going to happen. It doesn't happen overnight. You might be able to do bits and pieces and instill new practices and start getting people used to new tools, but you just can't do it overnight. And we have to stop forgetting that even for us as PMOs and the people that pay for us, the people that own our budgets, we have to understand that, and we have to help them understand it as well. So we've got the behavior people side, and obviously then process, there's a few things on process. Value is a big one, and I love to talk about value. I think that if your PMO is not being spoken about positively, and people are coming to you for things, and then you're missing something, there's something you might not be doing that your stakeholders, your customers actually need. And then sponsorship, which is a big one. So I thought we can discuss a few of these before we get into some ideas. But if there's is there anything on here specifically that anyone wants us to maybe spend a bit more time on and we can start with, rather than me deciding? I'm happy to choose, but I'm happy for you guys to raise if you've got any. Is there anything we want to start with? No? All right, why don't we start with sponsorship, right? And the reason why is because when you think about it, the biggest problem that we have in PMOs and have had, and I did some research a couple of years ago, and there's a white paper about it and talks about it, and this is like the #1 problem. Whether you live or die in terms of your PMO, that is down to your sponsorship. Your executive support, or the lack of, determines everything that happens to your PMO. If your PMO is being set up, shut down, expanded, scaled down, etc. A couple of years ago, I surveyed a bunch of CIOs through the CIO Executive Council, and 33% of them said they were ignoring ignoring their PMOs when it comes to rising, the rise of agile ways of working. They were ignoring their PMOs. There was another, I think 60 or so percent, basically 2/3, that basically are talking about we're downsizing because we don't need as much PMO. That's the assumption that's made. And then there was a component that was actually, so it was resizing, ignoring, and then there was another component that actually was giving the tools and support needed to actually help their PMO go to that next level. So you're never going to get your sponsor, the people supporting you, to actually understand what it is if you don't take them on that journey and show them. Don't tell them, show them. And you're also should never create metrics or anything that you're going to measure yourself on without getting them on board with it, because you need to agree whether it's 2 or 3 key metrics for your PMO that you could use to help demonstrate. One example is we used employee engagement satisfaction surveys as one of the key metrics to demonstrate the value the PMO was providing within a department. So that's one example. Dave, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, sure. I think for me, value and sponsorship are very much interlinked. You need to get your sponsorship, you need to be showing value, and vice versa as well. To be truly delivering to your value, you need that executive sponsorship, not just probably just from an executive sponsorship, but there's also the sponsorship of part of the stakeholders that you're investing in into the services that you're providing.
100%. Very well said. And I think the way you know whether you're getting that support or not is how long has your function been around? You know, what funding has been invested? Have you been given opportunities for training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I think it's really important to get close to an understanding of where your executives or where the sponsorship is coming from, where they are up to or where their mind is at, because often we make a lot of assumptions, but we don't actually spend the time to ask the right questions. So yeah, I think 100% agree. And speaking of value, I think there's been a couple of questions there around why is the PMO still necessary? That was the theme of the white paper that was about 25 pages. The PMO is absolutely necessary, I believe, but it needs to modify its shape and form. You know, like a chameleon, we need to change the way. The traditional PMO in the way that it's been, and you know, PMOs have been around for hundreds of years, it's not like that. We need to pivot to be able to adopt some of the agile, small a agile principles in order for us to be able to be what we need to be to support delivery. Because without delivery supporting and being seeing the value in us, we don't need to exist. PMO is not there for us because of our, you know, our desire to be, you know, running PMOs. It's there to support your customers. So 100% relevant. How they're related is the way that you apply some of the learnings from some of the things we're talking about today, and some of the opportunities I'll talk to you in a minute, to make sure that there is alignment between strategy, delivery, and operations. It's bringing the three together. And that is sort of the key piece that I think a lot of PMOs are missing. And I get some PMOs are at different levels of the journey as well. But it's 100% all about value. I do want to point out a couple others, and I'd love to hear from anyone else that maybe has a couple of thoughts on any of these. But, you know, the comment around syncing of Agile to PMOs and PMBOK frameworks, well, Agile metrics themselves, you know, each framework or practice or model you use is going to have their own way of measuring success. And then we talked about, you know, ROI and burn down and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not quite sure why you're trying to sync that to PMBOK, because PMBOK is a traditional methodology fundamentally based on waterfall approaches, so it's different. So I think that if you've got some agile activity happening, it's about understanding, well, what's the framework you're using and understanding what measures of success that has and that uses. So I think it's just understanding the misalignment between that. So that would be one thing. And then I think from a resistance perspective, I would love for Kathy, if you wanted to share, because you coach in mindset and getting teams on board. It does take time, but you have to demonstrate a little bit of value to get the results. But is there anything you wanted to add on that one? Because I think that's your specialty.
Excuse me. There's definitely the mindset's the key. And when we say mindset, it's all about attitude. And if you've got a few people with the right mindset, and maybe they're the people at the coalface, but you haven't got the people at the supporting, especially, dare I say, some people at the PMO level are maintaining, we've got to have these governance checkpoints, we've got to have these kinds of reports, and their mindset has not adapted or understood the agile way and doesn't understand the flexibility required, then they become the blockers. They become the wall between strategy and execution, which we don't want. So I think the mindset needs to be universal, and it needs to be, you know, mindsets can only happen at individual level. We can't say it's an organizational mindset. it's culture. Culture is not something that you can just instill like a piece of software. You don't just implement software and go, ta-da, there's our new company culture. Culture is a combination of individual things. And in fact, people are the culture, and it's their behaviors and their attitudes that form that culture. So that's why the mindset drives the culture that supports an agile way of working or not. One last thought is, when we're thinking about agile, yes, it's a trendy thing to do, but organisations sometimes go agile without any clear idea of why, apart from everybody else is doing it. So there needs to be some clear ideas of what problems are trying to be solved by going agile, because purpose and mindset kind of go together. Because if we know a sense of purpose of why we're doing something, then it's easier to make that change, because there's that, I know why I have to do this. I know why I have to change my way of thinking, working, reporting, that kind of thing.
That's awesome. Thank you, Kathy. Sebastian's got his hand up.
Yeah, I probably just want to add a bit of mix into this. So say, for example, now if we are delivering Agile, right? What if the client is not working on Agile? The client is then going to say that, hang on, I'm delivering a project, or I'm having a project where we are working on Waterfall, right? We've got milestones, we've got fixed or known budget and so forth. But you are coming to me on an agile sprint. You're giving me things on a iterative sprint basis. I don't have a full-time testing team that every 2 weeks or whenever there's going to test for you. So that's the challenge that I'm facing, right? And then that's the challenge that I've been trying to communicate with my leadership, to say it's good that we're going on agile. Yes, it works. However, then we need to be very clear in our communication with the clients that this is how we're going to be working with you. Are you okay with it? That's that big gap that doesn't work. And just to add on to what Kathy was saying, that again, the problem that I see is, and again with other people that I've spoken with, is agile is always something that they think, oh, it's only with the delivery team, with the IT team, they will just do agile. But the rest of the company, now we'll just continue on with business as usual. So within the company itself, there will always be, I guess, conflict, and then it creates an issue then to say that, does agile really work then?
Yeah. Now, that's a really good point, and I think we could spend a lot of time talking about this, but just to give you a quick piece, because we in our business have a methodology that we use, the AMO method, which is very agile in nature. But then when we go to client sites, a lot of the time they don't have anything. They've got their own traditional waterfall. So the first point is we have to adopt and modify rather what we do to a degree with the client, so that we can work within their culture. Remember, I said visiting country as an example. So if we're visiting the country, and basically we need to adopt their cultures, their norms, their behaviors, their tools. So we have to change what we do to work with the client. The way that you would do that is you would upfront discuss and come up with your own, for that project, the hybrid way of working. Now, if it's an ongoing client, you can come up with something, invest a bit more time. If it's a short-term engagement, we would basically have our engagement success check and criteria and work through and define what those things are. But I think it's definitely something that is a matter of engaging upfront and knowing the way you're going to approach it. We can't expect clients to change the way they work for us. After all, they're paying us to help them improve their problems, and adding our methodology for them, because that's the way we work, is not going to solve their problem. So that hopefully gives you a little bit of support, but I'm happy to have a more detailed conversation if you like about that one. So I'm just going to move us on, because we've got a couple more things to go through before we wrap up. And if you guys enjoyed what we've been covering and want to know more, then please reach out and we can do further conversations. I just wanted to quickly bring your attention to a couple of final points. So one of them is, what are some actual PMOs doing? And these are real activities that some of the PMOs are doing when thinking about their changes, and they're trying to go down that agile ways of working. Some of the things on here, you might go, we already do that, we're not agile, we're traditional. Yes, the difference is they're doing this, but they're applying that small A agile lens. So they might be building some process, getting some feedback, hearing from the customer, and then making more changes, getting feedback from the customer and making more changes. Or they might be demonstrating the work that they do using Kanban walls. They might be showcasing things. So it's not that you change everything you do and you stop doing PMO, no, but it's about changing the way that you do it and actually starting to apply some of those agile principles. Now, some opportunities as well that I wanted to quickly share is these things that are in blue or in purple. These are the things you double down on. So if you're in a PMO today and you're not already doing some of this, depending on the size of the organization, you would double down on these. The things that are in orange are some of the supportive elements that you'll find are in mid-sized to larger teams. So if you're a small team, you're unlikely to have global oversight or integration. Or integration is an example of how do you bring, you know, methodology that exists in, and this happened for me in a previous role. New Zealand's got a methodology approach, and Singapore had a methodology approach, and Australia had we had to integrate and get them all on the same page. So for these ones that are in orange, it's more for the mid-sized to larger teams. The items in yellow, and I can share these with you guys, is the things you start to take ownership of. So I mentioned earlier an example around the ePMO. Well, they've taken complete ownership for tool management and actually tools that relate to these agile ways of working as one example. And then the items in green are the new requirements that are becoming a necessity for organizations as they move forward on their agile ways of working journey. And these items in green are things that are probably new and different that you may not actually have been involved in before, that are opportunities for the PMO to actually take their PMO to the next level. All of this summarized is something that we talk about and are going to talk about in a workshop series, which I can share more details if anybody would like to know about it. Basically, what we've got coming up is a workshop where we're actually going to help to create a learning journey for the PMO, which is going to take you from what the hell's going on to building something that you can actually use in your organization. It's going to create value. We're talking about playbooks, processes, defining the vision statement, building your charters, all of the different things that we've talked about, and then basically the last 5 years of work. So it's something that we're going to be sharing in the coming weeks. If you are interested in finding out more about it, I will pop the link into pre-registration form, and I'm going to pop that into here. Anyone that was on this meetup will get a 20% off for the training. It will be something that will happen over a series of weeks. So it would be a 4 weeks. It'll be a weekly 3 hours over 4 weeks so that you can actually take what we're teaching and apply it, give us feedback, we'll give you feedback and use real life examples as opposed to just being theory. And it'll be very engaging both on mindset and practice. So I've just put a link in there to Airtable. If you're interested in just finding out more, register and we'll come back to you in the coming weeks. And as we promised at the beginning, if you could just fill out the 1-minute survey, I would really appreciate it because obviously we do this voluntarily and we hope that it added value. So if it did, I would really appreciate that.